Hey class, it is Mrs. Gilling here, and we are going to be going over your Unit 3 video assignment where we're going to talk about tort law and give you kind of a preview of Unit 3. So let's go ahead and present the presentation. There's something going on with my video. For some reason, it doesn't want to show my face when I present the slideshow, but don't worry, I'm still here. I'll be talking to you. You just won't be able to see my face for some reason. But here goes. So Unit 3, all about tort law. Before we get into the kind of the nuts and bolts of the unit, I want to go over our joke of the unit. You ready? Okay, so here's a couple of kids. They're in juvenile court. So think back to last unit when we talked a little bit about juvenile court, and here's your joke. So the lawyer talking about their client says, "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty by reason of a sugar buzz." Doesn't that seem like something someone might plead in juvenile court, especially after Halloween? A kid has a bunch of Halloween candy and goes crazy and blames their mistakes on sugar. I can totally see that happening. But anyways, I thought this was a funny cartoon. Hopefully you did too. So let's kind of move into what we're learning about this unit. So first of all, what is a tort? So what we've learned before in criminal law, when someone commits a wrong, we call it a crime. So you learned that in previous units. Criminal law, when you do something wrong, it's called a crime. In civil law, when a person commits a wrong, we call it a tort. Crimes are considered wrongs against all of society. So you've probably heard people say that after they commit a crime, they have to repay their debt to society. That's what we consider going to jail, community service, those sorts of things, are repaying your debt to society. Civil laws deal with wrongs or torts against individuals. So when you hear someone talking about suing somebody else for damages, that's a tort they're talking about. Instead of being punished with jail time, individuals who lose judgment in civil cases must compensate the plaintiff for harm done. So it's when you go to a civil court, they're not going to go say, all right, we need to go to jail for 2 years. They're going to say, okay, you harmed this person, so you need to pay him back $1,000, $2,000. Whatever it is that you harmed them, that you injured them for, you have to compensate for that. So that's kind of the difference between criminal law and tort, civil laws. And last thing, there's a few different types of torts. So they include intentional wrong, negligence, and strict liability. And we're going to talk about each of those a little bit here. So first of all, intentional torts. In order for something to be an intentional tort, actions need to be taken to deliberately harm another person or their property. So they have to mean, and on purpose, harm somebody or their property. So that means somebody's causing injury to persons. Some crimes that you've probably heard of that involve that are battery, assault, infliction of emotional distress, false imprisonment, and defamation. They could also cause injury to property. A common tort that you've probably heard of here is trespassing. When you break into somebody else's property area and maybe you harm something, maybe you vandalize, that sort of thing. Negligence. Negligence is conduct that falls below the standard established by law for protecting others against unreasonable risks of harm. So sometimes in life, when you're in certain positions, you have a responsibility to essentially be careful, to make sure that a situation is safe for other people. And if you don't provide that safety, then you're considered negligent. For a plaintiff to win a negligence action against the defendant, each of the following 4 elements must be proven by a preponderance of the evidence. So they would have to show that these 4 things were there in order to win their case, in order to prove that somebody was negligent against them. The first one is duty. So that means the defendant or accused wrongdoer owed a duty of care to the plaintiff or injured person. That means they had an obligation to protect them, to keep them safe. Next is breach of duty. The defendant's conduct breached or violated that duty. So you first have to prove that somebody has a duty, and then you need to prove that they violated that duty, that they disregarded it, that it wasn't something that was important to them. Next is causation. The defendant's conduct caused the plaintiff's harm. You have to actually prove in court with a preponderance of the evidence that it was the defendant that actually made something happen. There had to actually be harm caused, and it's because of what the plaintiff did or didn't do that caused, the defendant did or didn't do that caused that harm to happen, to come to play. And finally, damages. they have to prove that the plaintiff suffered actual injuries or losses. So this is also something that could be a little bit different from a criminal court. In criminal court, you don't necessarily always have to prove that an actual injury occurred. You could say that they thought about injuring a person, and you can go to jail for that. But in civil cases, you have to prove that there's actual damages, and they're not going to get paid for anything above those damages. So an example of this is if somebody were to hurt somebody else, maybe somebody had an obligation to shovel a sidewalk. That's something where you have a duty to shovel your sidewalk. You know, people are coming over, you choose not to shovel your sidewalk, they slip and they fall on your sidewalk and they get hurt. They have to prove that they actually got hurt and that getting hurt created damages. Now, if they slip and fall and they don't get hurt, then you're not going to win a civil case because there were no damages there. So those are the four things that have to be proven in order to win a negligence suit: duty, breach of duty, causation, and damages. And the last thing is strict liability. This is kind of an interesting one. So the defendant is liable to the plaintiff regardless of fault. It doesn't have to necessarily be their fault what happened. You must only prove causation and damages. So here's some specific examples of this. And the reason why we talked about strict liability is that there's sometimes in society obligations where it's your job to make sure that things don't happen. You're putting yourself in a situation that could be dangerous, and because of that, your actions could harm somebody else. And by virtue of being in that situation, you have a liability to make sure that bad things don't happen to other people. So here's a few examples of that. So first is dangerous activities. Let's say you own a demolition company, and while you're demolishing a building, some rocks fall and they land on somebody's car and they cause a damage. Even if you didn't mean for that to happen, there wasn't fault necessarily, you didn't mean to, you were participating in a dangerous activity. So by virtue of participating in a dangerous activity, they can win a suit against you because what you did caused the damages, and there were actual damages, and you were part of a dangerous activity. Those are liabilities that come along with having a business. They don't have to prove that you meant to do it. They just have to prove that what you did caused it and created those damages. Next is animals. If you own an animal and somebody comes to your home and that animal attacks that other person, you are liable. Now, you didn't say to the animal, go get them, but the animal did that. By virtue of owning that animal, you are accepting the liability for that animal. So if they were to be aggressive towards somebody else, you would be held responsible. And then the last one are defective products. So this comes into play a lot with, for instance, like pharmaceutical companies, maybe even, car companies. You hear a lot about recalls. If a car company creates a car or vehicle and it malfunctions in some way, there's a lot of examples of airbags malfunctioning. They can be held liable. Even though they didn't mean to hurt someone, you have an obligation to protect people by creating those products. And that's what I've got for you. That's the information I wanted to show you, kind of that brief overview of tort law. It's actually a super interesting thing. If you decide later on in your life that you want to pursue law, I would really encourage you to study up more on this and to pay a lot of attention to this section, because usually when we think of law, we think about the criminal law. We think about the stuff we see on Law and Order when they're going before the judge and they're talking about prison sentence. But this is a very common thing that we have in society, this civil law, where you have people suing other people for these damages. Very fascinating stuff. So now that you've watched this video, I encourage you to go and answer those quick questions so you can get credit for watching the video in your Unit 3 video assignment. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me, email, text, phone call, whatever works best for you, and I'll help you out. But other than that, thanks guys for watching this video and have a great week.